Coming up, a Sad Styles production.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mikey Aaronworth, signing on to the Sign Off of Frameworth podcast for yet another week, and I am joined in studio by the ever-smiling. Look at you. You are excited to be here. Brian Aaronworth, it has been a couple weeks. We got ahead on our recordings a little bit.
Yeah.
But now we're in studio. You're happy as a clam. You just had a little vacation as well.
Yeah, what's a vacation?
What's
Hasn't
a vacation?
had one for a few years, yeah.
That's fair, but it was a little golf trip. You got out. You got
down
some
to
sun.
Florida.
That's probably why the smiles are there, right?
Well, not really, because I was smiling on the way out, coming back.
Not so much, not so much. That is the voice of Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth Sports Marketing. And as always, we like to start off the podcast by saying a big thank you to all of our listeners who got out there and gave us some ratings and reviews on iTunes or your podcast platform of choice. We're going to read one at random. No giveaway this week, but a little shout out to Mark.
No, let's give something away.
We're going to give something away?
Yeah, let's give something away.
All right, what are we going to give away?
Who's the review from? Where's the reviewer from?
The reviewer is Mikey Aaronworth on Apple Podcasts. I don't know, but we don't know where they're from yet.
Okay, so let's do a what the heck? Let's do a Sidney Crosby. It's Christmas time. Sidney Crosby 8x10 signed photo.
Okay, listen, you heard it here first. This is why we have the big guns on the podcast.
Well, we appreciate the reviews. I hope it's a good one. Otherwise, he's going to get a Nail Yakupov one. No, I'm kidding. Nail's a good guy, and he's a
great
friend.
guy, yeah. So we've got Mark P1126. Obviously, people listening with bated breath now to hear if it's going to be their name. The premier show for sports fans and memorabilia collectors. Hey, that's kind of what we pin ourselves as, so that makes sense. This podcast is a must listen for sports fans, especially those of you who like to collect memorabilia and autographs. With an impressive lineup of knowledgeable guests, the hosts guide the conversation seamlessly and deliver an outstanding product. Thank you so much, Mark P1126. We're sending you an item worthy of that review. Reach out to us, signoffpod@frameworth.com, and we'll get that sent out to you as soon as we can. Now, without further ado, we are joined by a guest this week. This week, we're joined by a man whose name has come up a few times indirectly during past interviews. Together with his family, he's left an indelible mark on the city of Toronto, the world of hockey, and the lives of all those touched by his charitable endeavors. It's possible you might not recognize his name, but it's nearly impossible not to have felt his influence, and we're going to tell you how as we sit down this week with Tom Bitove. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Well, I'd like to meet that guy.
He sounds great, right? He sounds great. I got to start writing introductions for
really? Can you write one for me? Not an epitaph yet, but...
Let's not go there.
Let's not go there yet. No. But thanks for joining us, Tom. Obviously, we got a ton to get into because your life has touched so many parts, especially of the city of Toronto, you and your family together. Most notably, I think, as a point of reference for what we want to get into this week is your involvement with Wayne Gretzky's restaurant. You know, Wayne comes up a ton on this podcast, and you were directly involved with that. But before we get in there, I do kind of want to talk about a little bit of your history and your family, and then we'll get into the obvious, specifics about Wayne Gretzky's restaurant. But you're one of 5 children with a family with a fairly prominent name. The Bitove name is something that a lot of people would recognize, even if you're not fully familiar. Wow, that's why I talked about the idea of being influenced or feeling your influence being a part of Toronto or even in Canada. You've been very vocal in interviews that I've read, one such being in the Globe and Mail, of the fact that you as a family have somehow managed to remain close in spite of the fact that you've been working together in business for so long. I bring this up because, our family is relatively similar. We've had our siblings kind of take a stab at working at Frameworth as well, but we've maintained some closeness in spite of the fact that there are always going to be some disagreements in business. Has that been difficult for you with the family to maintain, who's in charge of what and maintain this calm and respectful demeanor among your family?
I'd say yes and no to that, Mike. The family we're one of the rare families that made it through to the full second generation transition.
Right.
I remember reading a book many, many years ago that talked about 1% of the families make it through to a successful transition to the second generation. So we're fortunate enough to do that. But it didn't come without a lot of hard work. My parents obviously invested a lot of time and energy in it to start. As a kid, you're just accepting what's going on in the business, but then later when you become a parent, you realize how much your parents sacrificed and put into it and guided you a certain way. And we spent a lot of time as a family on this topic. We've got outside advisors that are part of our board, which are an integral part of our board, and they have a serious commitment to our family, and it's just great to have.
I think some of that outside influence is definitely important. I mean, we've seen what can happen with a sort of a family run company just in recent history.
Just watch Succession.
The Rogers. Well, you're stepping on the punchline a little bit, but
sorry, Mikey. Sorry.
we've seen what happens to families like the
we don't
Rogers
rehearse
family.
this in advance, so we don't know.
Not enough. Well, I mean, owing to the idea that we just gave away a signed Sidney Crosby photo, and I didn't know we were even going to do it, so it's fine. There are surprises aplenty on this podcast. But yeah, the Rogers family is an example of a family that was in the news with some shifts in a power dynamic there, or attempted shifts. Also, the Roy family from Succession. I was going to ask, do you watch Succession?
Fabulous.
It's a great show. You, as someone who's involved in a family business in that capacity, does that show take on a bit of a different meaning to you?
I'd have to say yes. I mean, there's so many similarities to the situations that they're in that we have been in and battled through in the past, and you can connect with a lot of those items on a first-hand basis.
Which of the Roy family members would you say you are most like?
I can't go there. I can't go there.
We won't go there.
Because then you're going to ask me which one of my siblings fit.
I'm not. Let's not do that. It's impossible to navigate that, because one of the key tenets of that show is that everyone is in some way deplorable. So we don't need to compare ourselves to them one way or another. Obviously, we as I mentioned, we want to get into the whole idea of working at Wayne Gretzky's restaurant and opening that and managing that. But before we do that, what about in general how you got involved in the restaurant industry in the first place? I'm assuming that with Wayne Gretzky, it wasn't just approaching a guy on the street who happened to be Wayne and saying, let's open a restaurant. You must have had some experience with that prior to your meeting with Wayne.
Yeah, the family had been in the restaurant business historically. It actually goes back to my dad when he got married to my mom in 1949.
Your dad, John Sr.?
John Sr. He was the youngest of three siblings, and they were all married, and they're living with the parents above an 800 square foot butcher shop on Queen Street East. And my dad, being a pretty smart guy, did the math pretty quickly and realized that 8 people living out of 800 square feet and having a butcher shop that's 800 square feet isn't going to last very long. Right. So he took his essentially the money that they got from the marriage, from the wedding, and my mom being the brains behind it financially, and they built a 14-stool restaurant up on Avenue Road. And a cute little story there, it was open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., and my dad was behind the counter 7 days a week.
Oh, wow.
For 16, 18 hours. And I know this for a fact because a girl I went to high school with, her father was the subject of this discussion. My dad knew him, and he was a well-known lawyer. He'd come into the restaurant in the morning for a coffee, and then in the evening on his way home for a piece of pie and a coffee. And one day he's there, and he says to my dad, "You and your brother are the hardest working guys I've ever seen in this business." And my dad says, "Me and my brother." He goes, "Yeah, you and your brother." He goes, "I come in the morning, one of you is here. I come in the evening, one of you is here." My dad goes, "That's me."
What a great story.
Wow.
Well, the other part of it was my mom was the day waitress, and my aunt, my dad's sister, was the evening waitress. So the three of them ran that 14-stool
And trying
restaurant.
to raise a family at the same time?
Starting as we know, the family started much earlier in our age at that point in time. So by 23 years old, they already had my sister. So things had already started. But then he made that into a small chain of restaurants. They were called Java Shops. And he had 5 of them in the city of Toronto, and did well with those. Then he decided he liked the fixturing business, the restaurant fixturing business. So he got into that for a number of years. And then the opportunity came for him to take over a franchise out of the States called Big Boy Family Restaurants. Mm-hmm. So he became the Canadian franchisee, and we had 32 of those. And that's when I started getting involved in business. From the day I first worked in a restaurant at 10 years old, I just fell in love with the business. People say I'm crazy, but it was a passion. And to this day, it's never been work for me. It's always been fun, and it's always been a great profession to do. So
I was gonna ask, because it's not everyone. We as a family we had these conversations about, is this the business that we want to be in? I was probably around the same age, 10 years old, my dad would have me coming in working summers and things like that. I didn't know off the bat that this was something I wanted to spend my life doing. I went to school for English and philosophy and law and thought I was going to branch out. But you knew from an early age, that it was it the atmosphere of a restaurant, or was it the business side of it? Which was your preference there?
It was just being around people, making people happy, just working hard and being rewarded for it, and not financially, being rewarded for it by watching the people's smiles on their face when they're leaving.
Yeah.
And to be fair, my dad did everything in his power. Both parents did everything in their power to convince us not to go into the restaurant business.
Really?
My dad referred to it as the pit of all businesses. You're working when your friends are playing. You're playing when your friends are working, and it's just a tough job. You can never get away from it. You can serve 1,000 people in a day, but if one of those 1,000 has a bad experience, it's blown away your whole day. So he did everything in his power to convince us not to get in the business. But as a cute little aside, many years later, I asked him if he really didn't want us to get in the business. And my dad, whenever he didn't want to answer a question, would just look at you and smile. And he looked at me and smiled. So I think deep down he was happy that we all joined the business. But
little reverse psychology.
In retrospect, yes.
Logan Roy would be proud. Are you kidding me? That is, yeah.
No, you know what? And we've talked about my experiences in the restaurant business.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a great business. I love the business. Tough hours. It wasn't as tough on me as most people, because it was, my first restaurant was pretty successful from the beginning. So it took it a little easier, got more managers, played a little more golf, but I was there all the time. Right. Whether you're working physically as the manager of the day, or you're just being there to make sure that your customers are happy, it's long hours, which is not necessarily conducive to a happy marriage. So you gotta think about that too. Your wife's got to be on side with it.
Well, things like dinner, having dinner at 6 o'clock was never an option, especially once I got married.
Right.
And my wife, fortunately, her family was in the restaurant business, so she knew that I'll be home at 6 means I could be home at 9, I could be home at 11.
Yeah.
As soon as the business warranted, I would get home. And so 39 years later, we're still married, so I guess that worked out okay.
I guess it did. I mean, I'm assuming that there would have been more difficult times as you were sort of building up, and now hopefully you're able to find other ways to kind of supplement your time and have more of a regimented schedule. But I want to get into a little bit about how you transitioned from that to working with the Gretzky family in opening up Wayne Gretzky's restaurant in Toronto. 1993, it closed recently in 2020. What were those initial conversations like, and how did you get to the point where you were going to be having a meeting with Wayne Gretzky in the first place?
It's actually a great story. A friend of ours, Brian Cooper.
Yeah, we talked about him earlier.
Dear friend of mine and a very close friend of Wayne's. And our family had pretty good success at this point in time. We developed the Hard Rock Cafes in Canada. We had the restaurants at Skydome, Rogers Centre now. We had the travel centers on the highways. We had a bunch of very successful businesses. And Wayne was injured at the start of the 92-93 season. And he had the back issues, and he didn't play till I think around Christmas, maybe just after Christmas. Anyhow, we had some time, so him and Brian had been talking, and Wayne started talking about life after hockey, and Brian discussed the concept of a restaurant with him, and he said restaurants terrified him because they were so labor intensive, and you had to have the right partner and everything, and Wayne wasn't going to run a restaurant, so who would he ever take? And he had 1,000 offers over the years to do restaurants, but he just wasn't comfortable moving ahead with any of them. So Brian, being the good friend he is, suggested that Wayne have a chat with me. He said he thought that the Bitove family would be a perfect partner for Wayne and the Gretzky family. 3 nights later, I'm at home, the phone rings, and it's Mike Barnett, who I had never spoken to in my life. Mike introduced himself, we had a chat, and Mike fortunately knew the restaurant business, the bar business, because he had been in the business for a period of time. And he said, I don't know what Wayne sees in the business, but he wants to do something, so...
playing a little hard to get there, hey?
Can you come down and have a meeting with us? So I took my best negotiator that I ever dealt with, my father, and our lawyer, our corporate lawyer, and we went down and met with Wayne and Janet and Mike and their in-house counsel. And in 2.5 hours, we had a deal done.
It seems like that's quicker than you would normally have a deal done. Now, I'm so fascinated by this idea because at this point in time, negotiations, business negotiations, you're no stranger to them. And you've probably had negotiations at this point with very high up, powerful people but none of them named Wayne Gretzky. Was there an added level of stress or concern going into a negotiation with an athlete, either because he is Wayne Gretzky or maybe he's a bit of a wild card because he's not as familiar with the negotiation process? What are you thinking prior to stepping into this meeting?
I remember talking with my dad at length on the flight out there about how we were going to handle it. And my dad said, we're just going to let it happen. I mean, if it was meant to be, it was meant to be. We're not going to try and force this on Wayne. Wayne's not going to try and force us into a deal that we don't want. So we're just going to play this out and see how the discussions roll out. And pretty much everything we discussed that day, well, to get a deal done in 2.5 hours is pretty impressive, but everything we discussed that day was based on Wayne's brand and the way we were going to promote Wayne's brand and develop his brand. Because at that point in time, brands weren't all that big on athletes.
Right.
It was kind of the nascent stage of branding for athletes, and Wayne was at the forefront. You know, as Wayne said to me at one point in time, you know, can you imagine how Gordie Howe would have been if he understood branding?
Right. You know what? It's a funny thing because if you know Wayne, knowing Wayne as well as I do, and which isn't as well as many, but I know that sitting down at a meeting, it won't take Wayne long to make a decision if he feels good about what the conversation is.
Right.
So when you say that you guys in 2.5 hours and made, you know, pretty much done the deal, that doesn't surprise me at all, because knowing you and knowing Wayne, if he has to have that good feeling, and once that happens, the details can be worked out a little bit later, but he was comfortable with the thing. That's the way Wayne works.
It feels like that makes sense, and it checks out. I'm curious about two things. One, just a quick question. Is this the first deal or agreement that you had signed with an athlete at this point?
Yes.
This is the first one. Now, how similar in actuality was the restaurant compared to the conversation that you guys were having initially about what you wanted the restaurant to be?
Oh, it ended up being exactly what we had discussed. It was all about Wayne's brand and our ability to execute Wayne's brand. We knew how to operate a restaurant, but every day we were in business, if there was a business proposal put in front of us, our first question is, how does it affect Wayne's brand?
Right.
Whether that was year 1 or year 27, it was the same question we would ask, and we'd always answer it the same way, because we realized that we were honored and in a very special place to be able to work with Wayne's brand. And we realized that was the reason people came to the restaurant. So it wasn't a matter of what Tom Bitove wanted. It was a matter of what the fans wanted out of the Wayne Gretzky brand.
How long, how long did it take you to familiarize yourself with exactly what Wayne wanted? I'm assuming in the beginning you would have had to kind of reference him, you know, hey, this is where we want to move. Is this okay? But by the end of your relationship with, or, you know, after X number of years, did you essentially know without even asking what he would want or not like in his own branding?
I'd have to say yes as time went along. I mean, it was pretty much that way from the start, because we would spend a considerable amount of time on what would Wayne do in the situation,
Right.
what would Wayne want his brand to reflect in the situation. So it was always an integral part of every discussion we had. But yeah, I won't say it got easier, but it became more natural.
I bet. Yeah.
You know, I'll just say this about anybody, and we've had involvement with Wayne over the years, and we've had Sidney Crosby's relationship, and I would say to anybody working with professional athletes, if you want to maintain a relationship with an athlete, especially superstars, that's exactly what Tom's saying is exactly what needs to happen. You have to put their brand first.
Right.
And I go back to when we were starting with Sidney Crosby or Wayne. Every decision you make has to have that question in the back of your mind. What would Sidney want to do? What would Wayne want to do? And if you can do that, you can build that great relationship with them. And it happens with Wayne's Winery. It happens with the restaurant. It happens with Sidney Crosby. Everybody's unique, and they don't want to be portrayed as something they're not.
Right.
So Sidney doesn't want a podcast. What's
wrong
Twitter,
with the podcast?
No. Sid, he may do this one time. But Sidney doesn't want Twitter accounts. Yeah. He doesn't want to be involved in social media because it has implications that he doesn't like, and all that stuff. So what Tom's saying is dead on, I think, especially with people like Wayne, Sidney.
Yeah, and it feels as though it was almost most of this was unwritten at the time that you signed the agreement. So it feels as though the blueprint that we follow, you know, echoes of it are a result of what you and Wayne had first worked on. As you mentioned, it was not very common for an athlete to come out with his own branding of a restaurant at that time, and especially working with someone who knows the business so well. The number of times that those relationships probably happened and failed versus your example of it succeeding, I think everyone kind of looks to that and thinks, what is it about it that works? I mean, it was so successful that I believe the first agreement was for 10 years. Is that right?
That's right.
And the next X number of years wasn't an agreement at all on paper, was it? Can you explain what happened after the scope of the first agreement?
Well, the first 10 years went by in a blur. I mean, it was just incredible how quickly it went by. And we were coming up to the 10th year anniversary, and I just thought we should have a formal document to extend the relationship. And the negotiation kind of got, I wouldn't say challenged, but it just wasn't really proceeding the way I wanted it to. So Wayne happened to be in town one day, and I just said to him, look, here are the 3 issues that I'm looking at, and I'm not comfortable giving in on them because I think they would affect the brand in a negative way. And Wayne said, it's good enough for me, let's do it. I said, what do you mean it's good enough for you, let's do it? He goes, I'll tell his counsel to just get it done. So I said, so we shook hands and said, done. Well, the council and I still couldn't get a document done. So it was about 6 months go by, and Wayne goes, I gave you my word. I'm good for it. You're good for it. Let's just keep it going. So based on that, we proceeded to have the next 17 years without an agreement. It's just based on a handshake.
I love hearing that. And Dad, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that as well.
Some of my best clients, we had an agreement, a document in place for the first year, 2 years, and after that, nothing. And the guys that we have just continue on because of the relationship you've built over and the trust. I think that's more than anything is the trust that they have in you to do the job right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it feels like some of the best relationships, not to besmirch the names of lawyers because we need them in a lot of ways, but if you can maintain a relationship without the need for that sort of paperwork, and there could be horror stories as a result of that, but it seems like that is absolutely not the case with you and Wayne, or Dad, with you and Sidney and some of your other athletes as well. But Wayne isn't the only person who was involved, obviously, in the restaurant. It was a family affair. So two families with fairly well-known names coming together to create what would become one of the most iconic restaurants in Toronto for a variety of reasons. But you've been quoted as saying to Wayne that his father was your best employee. Can you explain kind of what you meant by that, and if so, why you didn't pay him for being your best employee? Come on.
Well, God bless Wally. He was one of my favorite people in the history of the world. He was just such a great human being. But yeah, when Wayne would come by the restaurant and everything would be going well, and he'd ask questions, and it was my dad good, and everybody's fine, everybody's great. And I said, Wayne, your dad is the best employee I've got because he makes sure everybody's happy. He makes sure everybody's got an autograph. He visits every table for a picture, and all I have to do is buy him dinner.
There you go. He will work for food.
Spare ribs. Back ribs.
What were some of back ribs were his favorite dish? I know you also had
Pierogies.
There were 2 dishes that you had to make sure were absolutely correct, true to the source material. Do you recall what those 2 dishes were?
Pierogies and the meatloaf.
And the meatloaf. And were those up to the standards of Wally and Wayne?
Always were.
Always were.
Whenever I was in the restaurant with Wayne, he'd order the pierogies. He'd say, you got to try these. This is mom's recipe? Grandmother's recipe.
Yes.
And these are the best pierogies. And I come from, my wife is Ukrainian, so we get some pretty good pierogies. They're really good. They were always a staple item.
Pierogies were kind of our currency, our trading card with Wally. And a couple occasions we gave him some of ours and he gave us some of his, and it was just kind of this mashup of seeing which ones were the best. I can't besmirch the name of our Baba who created our pierogies, but I'm sure everyone's family is particular to their own.
Yeah.
The only 2 dishes I believe that lasted from 93 to 2020 were the meatloaf and
That's
the
true.
pierogies.
I mean, the process at the start was I took the entire menu to Wayne, and Wayne's attitude was like, Tom, you're the restaurateur, you know what sells.
Yeah.
I said, but what's got to be on this menu? What authenticates the menu to you, to anybody that's a Gretzky? And he goes, well, the pierogies and the meatloaf. And so that was the standard that we set for the next 27 years was the Pierogies and Meatloaf. Everything kind of evolved around them.
See, I love that because I think there's probably this mentality, maybe more so now than back then, that if an athlete or a star, a celebrity goes into the world of like the restaurant industry or an athlete goes into a movie as an actor, that there's a level of expectation that it's just going to be good based on the name. You know, the athlete is going to draw people to the movie because it's an athlete in a movie. Oh, this is great. You know, or an athlete is going to have a restaurant and people are going to go because it's the athlete's restaurant. This is great. But at the core of what you guys were doing was maintaining this level of authenticity to the Gretzky brand, to the family. And we had a similar conversation with Glenn Gretzky and Laurie Halomis a few weeks back when we were in conversation with them about Great 2, the book about Wally, the guy we're talking about. And they had said that so much of the Gretzky brand is about making people feel like they're a part of the family. And that idea of the meatloaf dish and the pierogi dish, you know, sure, it's 2 dishes, it's food, but at the core of the mentality of including that on the menu over the scope of the entire existence of the restaurant is you guys saying this has to be a family affair. Absolutely. And I love that. I think that's fantastic. Now, you obviously, speaking of family, had a fantastic role model in John Sr., and you've already said that a couple times on this podcast, how much you learned from John, your dad. But Wally was known to be a fantastic role model as well. And you having spent so much time with him, did you also feel that he was somewhat of a father figure to you in some ways? And if so, is there anything in particular that you had learned from him?
Just how to treat people. You watch the guy, he was in a situation where there could be 1,000 people in the room and he'd make sure that every one of those 1,000 people walked away happy.
Right.
And realizing he couldn't touch each one of them, but whether it was the way he spoke to the group, whatever it was, he always had such a great sense of the moment that he was in. And, you know, he had that serious brain injury back in the early 90s. And was a different man. I met him after the brain injury, so I didn't know him before.
Right.
But I was told he was a totally different man after the brain injury and much more accommodating and everything else. Before that, he was referred to as Dr. No, because as you know, Wayne never says no to anything. He expects us to say no for him in a lot of cases. Right. And Wally was the guy that had to say no to everybody. Mike Barnett assumed that role after.
Mike did a good job of that. But speaking of that, we should get him on one day. There's a great one. A great story. I think I've even told it about being in the restaurant when Wally and Wayne are there together.
Oh, wow.
And it was inevitable that, and Wayne showed up at the restaurant a lot. I mean, whenever he was in town, that was his home office. Yeah. Like he'd go from the hotel. And they'd say, well, let's go over to the restaurant for a bite to eat. And we'd go over there whenever I was with him.
Right.
And when Walter was there with Wayne, one story, it was a great story, Walter was so accommodating, and I've seen him do this with Wayne a number of times. Walking out of the restaurant, it was inevitable that when Wayne was in the restaurant, word would get out almost immediately. And people would start waiting outside. If, you know, some of them would come in for a drink looking for him. and others would wait outside, that, you know, kids would be out there, everybody be out there. And not just people walking the street. Guys within 10 minutes would have booklets of hockey cards and things for him to sign. And one time walking out of the restaurant with Walter and Wayne, and Wayne was in a bit of a hurry, and he had a car ready to pick him up. I think he was actually going with me to the airport. And Wally was there, and the kids are all out there with their binders and their things to sign and jerseys. Literally within minutes of him arriving in the restaurant. The way out, Walter's standing beside him. And I'm over in the car waiting for Wayne. And he finally gets in the car after about 15 minutes. We're late for the airport. And I said, what's going on? He says, my dad, he says, I'm signing autographs for all these people. He says, I've signed them all. Okay, there's like 20 people out there. I've signed them all. And people, he says, he wanted to leave, and his dad says, no, there's a guy with a binder there. He says, Dad, that guy's been back to his car 3 times to get more items. He says, I have to go. And he says, he's got to make a living too, you know. Wow. And so Wayne, he was half mad and half laughing, and off we go to the airport. That was Walter. He wouldn't leave without, he would sign every autograph and make Wayne sign him. So it drove Wayne crazy when he was with his dad.
Well, a similar story. We were in the restaurant one time, and we were in what we called Gordy's room. The room was a tribute to Gordie Howe, which Wayne loved. It was the private dining room there, and we're just organizing a few people. You may have been there that day, Brian, but Wayne just wanted to have some pierogies before he left, and he stands and he gets everybody's attention to him. He says, Dad, please leave the curtains closed. I just want to have dinner, a bite to eat, and then I'll sign whatever you want after that, Dad. So Wally goes, okay, Wayne. And so everybody sits down. When pierogies come for Wayne, he didn't have one bite taken, and maybe one bite at that point in time. And Wally comes to the door and says, Wayne, I've got these people here from Detroit, and I know what you said. You didn't want them. You didn't want anybody to bother you, but they're leaving right now. And I told them that they could come in and get an autograph. So they come in. Before you know it, there's a lineup. And Wayne just raises his arms and goes, "Oh well,
What am I going to do?
It's my dad."
I'm so curious about that because obviously, having Wayne there is a huge draw. His name is one of the reasons why people wanted to check out the restaurant in the first place. Obviously, they'd come for the name, they'd stay for the food and the service. But the idea that when Wayne was there, people would come and linger and hope for an autograph and this and that. Great stories, but I'm curious as a business owner. As a restaurant, you want turnover in those tables. You want more people coming in and eating and spending. Was there ever a part of you that's like, this is great, it's got attention, but like, we've got a business to run. We need to start flipping some tables here?
Not really. I mean, the people were generally pretty respectful.
Yeah.
We had a few situations. Brian didn't refer to them as pros, but the pros, the guys with the binders of cards.
Yes.
They would challenge you from time to time because they'd come in and they'd identify the people that aren't pros, and they'd give them 2 pictures and say, you get both of these signed, give one back to me, and you can keep one.
Right.
Oh,
and that's why they call them pros.
Pros, because they know, yeah.
So, but Wayne was always good at picking them off, and I never saw Wayne use the word no for anything.
Right.
He expected us generally to use it, but Wayne was such a perfect gentleman that he would never say no. But he'd give you the look, and he'd look at the guy, and I knew who he was talking about, and I'd go to the guy and say, "Okay, you've got enough signed, pal."
Yeah.
He was a savant, Wayne, when it came to that stuff like that. Wayne would always spend, anytime I was there, he would always give at least 5 minutes, usually longer, at the end of dinner when he went out, and he would walk around the restaurant. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't his dad forcing him all the time. Right. There was 2 stories. One, that he would give enough time to walk around the restaurant and sign. And people that weren't even expecting him to or didn't even know he was there, especially when they didn't know he was there. And he'd see a group of kids with their parents at the table, and he'd walk over to the table and sit down and say, "Mind if I sit here for a second?" And blew him away. And the other one that was the best story I've ever been involved with was Wayne was waiting for him. He was up in your office, came down to the bar. I was at the bar. He said, "Come on down for a drink and shoot the shit." So I'm waiting at the bar. There's 2 guys next to me. I've told this story before. 2 guys next to me. And so I left a seat in between me and the 2 guys, thinking Wayne, give him a little gap so if he comes down, he'll sit on the left side of me. The guys were on the right, and there'd be a seat in between. And he comes down, sits right in between the 2 guys. And they're just looking back and forth, going nuts, okay? But they were respectful, didn't ask for an autograph. They had a camera on the bar, and didn't say a thing to Wayne, didn't want to bother him. They were just thrilled to sit next to him. And when Wayne got up to go, he looks at the guys and he says, "Is that your camera?" And the guy says, "Yeah, it is." He says, "Would you mind if I have my picture taken with you?"
Amazing.
Like, blew me. The guys were just, he didn't wait. He knew they wanted a photo. Yeah. He asked them if he could take a picture with them. I've told that story before, but it's my favorite one of autograph people with Wayne.
And there's a million of them. There was the cold night in January in our first few years, and Wayne was in town with the Kings, but he didn't plan a visit to the restaurant, but around 10 o'clock, 10:30, he said he was going to drop by. So essentially you walk in the door of the restaurant, and Wayne's got his back to the front door, and I'm facing the front door where we've got our elbows on the bar.
Right.
And these 2 young couples of a certain descent, and I say that only because it kind of plays out the way in the story, but the 2 couples walk in the door, and they're standing no more than maybe 6 feet away from Wayne and I. And the girl says, "I wonder if Wayne Gretzky ever comes here." And their guys go, "Nah, he never comes here. Don't you know what these guys do? They sell their name for money, and they never show up at the restaurant." And I'll guarantee you Wayne Gretzky's never been here. Wayne looks at me, winks, turns around and goes, "Hi, I'm Wayne Gretzky."
Oh my God.
4 of them almost passed out on the floor. Beyond the funniest thing I've ever seen.
I've never heard that story.
That's fantastic.
It was just Wayne and I at the bar, I mean, it was such a quiet night. It was snowing outside. There couldn't have been 10 people in the bar that night. It was a really, really quiet night, and these four walked in, and they just got blown away.
That must have felt great. I know that, you know, these moments probably, you know, he's got so many of them that maybe they lose a little bit of their luster, but a moment like that's got to feel pretty good to him.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you talk about how, there are pros who try to get his autograph, and how he's a pro at recognizing these things and knowing and still giving what he can, but trying not to go overboard. One quick story from my perspective. We had an event here with Wayne Gretzky years ago at Frameworth, a little gala evening. And before the signing, before we went out and he was taking his pictures and going to talk for the Q&A and all that, he was in here doing some signings for parts of the giveaway of the event. He had some jerseys to sign. There were 65 jerseys left that he had to sign for people at the event. Prior to him arriving during the day, I laid out all the jerseys, all 65 of them. I double counted, I triple counted, I quadruple counted. I did not want him to think we were trying to get one more than we needed. And he's in here and he starts signing. He's going through, this is later in the night, he's signing jersey by jersey by jersey. He's talking to us as he's going, as he always is. He's being cordial. And he gets to a point and he says, that was 65. And then he keeps signing and the room goes quiet. And in my head, all I'm thinking about is the story where he skates past 6 people in order to score a goal and goes to the ref and says, God, there's 6 people. It's too many men on the ice. How did you miss that? And I'm thinking, I missed something. It's Wayne Gretzky. Of course I missed it. It turns out I think because he was talking to us, he did miscount, which I thought was an impossibility. But for that moment, I was petrified. I just dripping in sweat the whole time. I just let that one go.
I talked about the trust you need to have. And that's the first way you're going to ruin the trust.
That was my concern.
Absolutely.
Now, I do want to get your opinion on this, Tom, because I have a ton of friends from out of town. I'm sure you speak to a lot of people out of town as well, Dad, who come to Toronto to take part in the history of the NHL by visiting the Hall of Fame, maybe Scotiabank, or at the time Air Canada Centre, maybe Maple Leaf Gardens, and they always, start their trip at the Hall of Fame and end it at Wayne Gretzky's restaurant as a part of this iconic hockey staple. Is there a part of you that takes pride in knowing that you created this pillar of what represents hockey? I mean, it essentially became the Hall of Fame for Wayne Gretzky with all the items that were in there. Do you often reflect on that, knowing that you played a part in that?
I don't know if I reflect on it. I mean, I'm obviously honored and proud to be such a significant part of that. I look back at it and say that in my wildest dreams, I never saw 27 years. I mean, when we did a 10-year deal, I thought if we make 10 years, that'll be great. So
right.
That was kind of significant. But we built a lot of our marketing, especially weekend marketing plans around the fact that the family of 4 that's coming from Timmins for the weekend to go to a Leaf game is going to go to the Hall of Fame hockey game at Wayne Gretzky's restaurant. So we can't let those people down. It's their magical weekend. They've spent all year planning for this. As we know, tickets cost a lot at Maple Leaf Gardens / Air Canada Centre / Scotiabank Arena. And so it's we're part of a significant spend for these people. We have to make sure that they're special. And we used to talk about that family of 4 that walks in the door, how we treating them. That was how we measured our business.
That's an interesting thing, because actually I never even thought of it that way, but I did know it happened. That's the big hockey trifecta.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you come to Toronto, and our friends who listen to this on a regular basis from Tignish, PEI.
Yeah.
It's always the Hockey Hall of Fame, the hockey game, and then Wayne Gretzky's before or after for drinks, and sometimes both.
Right.
Or food and drinks. Food and drinks. In those guys' case, it's mostly drinks.
Yeah. I love that idea. It's a great image, and I think it was absolutely a pillar of the consciousness of hockey at the time. And it's a shame it's closed, but obviously everything comes to an end at some point in time. And I think maybe that'll wrap up a little bit of our conversations about that restaurant.
Before you move on, one last thing, because being in the memorabilia business,
right.
I had a good opportunity to take a look at what the memorabilia that they had there.
Yeah.
Which was amazing. The kinds of products, his first jerseys with the Oilers and the WHA, and his sticks, his 802 goals, his helmets from Canada Cups, all that stuff was in the restaurant.
Right.
Millions of dollars worth of product, especially now. His stuff's gone through.
Now I'm having a panic attack.
I mean, it just blew me away when I really kind of looked at all the inventory that was there. Sticks, everything that was of consequence was either in Wally's basement or at the restaurant. And not only just Wayne stuff. Like there's Michael Jordan, like Wayne would trade stuff from other guys. So Michael Jordan game-worn jerseys and shoes, which are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point in time, was all at the restaurant, which blew people away. They just, half the time they'd spend eating, the other half they'd just look at everything that was in the displays. It was just phenomenal.
And what's incredible, Brian, is that in 27 years, I don't even have to touch wood because we're closed now. 27 years, not one item ever got stolen from the restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
When you really think, actually, we had one thing stolen from the restaurant in our first year of business. Wayne has a penchant for signing things just for the sake of signing things. It could be a newspaper, could be a desk, could be. Well, one time at the urinal, he signed his name. A few days later, I got a call and said, "Can you please come downstairs?" I went downstairs and somebody had sawed the drywall.
No.
And taken his name out.
Oh my God.
We have no idea when.
Oh, wow. That's I thought you were going to say that he actually signed the urinal, and there's a story of Hemingway dragging a toilet away from a bar that he used to be saying I put so much booze into this thing that I feel like I own it now. I imagine someone taking the urinal off the wall and carrying that home with
the
them.
drywall right there, big gap right above the urinal.
Crazy.
Oh wow, man, that's I mean I think it would be though sort of a disservice to only focus on the restaurant, as iconic as it is. You've done so much more over the course of your career. So I want to talk then about maybe some of your more ventures, because we are a podcast that likes to focus on sports marketing and the business of sports outside of the arenas. But inside the arena of, at the time, the Skydome, you had mentioned that you had developed or gained the rights to have why is the name blanking on me right now? Hard Rock Cafe. Hard Rock Cafe in there. And you also had a box in the Skydome. You were and the family were very commonly seen in the box in the Skydome, very iconically at one point, for having a hot tub installed in the box.
You did your homework.
Where did this idea come from? That is, and I actually have a picture from a news article of you in the hot tub, which I'll put on YouTube.
You don't want to show that.
No, you don't want to show that.
Where did that idea come from?
The suite had an area, it was strange, an area to the left of it, which was like an elevated area with nothing on it, no chairs, no anything, it's just carpet.
Right.
And it was an extension of the football press box that never got used. And so your crazy friend, John Mcdermott,
who we will talk about in a little bit here.
Your name came up we had him on this podcast,
did you?
and yeah, he mentioned you a couple of times.
John's a dear friend of mine. John is talking with me one day, and I jokingly, we're at a game, and I say, well, that's where we're going to put the hot tub. Pure bullshit call from me. I'm just I didn't even remember.
Just having some fun, yeah.
Well, about 2-3 weeks later, I get a call I'm in my office in the Skydome, and I get a call from the loading dock saying that there's a hot tub there for delivery. I go, what? There's a hot dog there for a delivery. So I phone Mcdermott up and I go, did you? He goes, it's there, isn't it? Anyhow, so we thought, let's have some fun with it. So we let them put it up there. We had to hand bomb the water from the sink to the...
Oh, geez.
Oh, wow.
Like 1,000 buckets of water later or whatever it was. And we had just a family night there, and I jumped in for a bit, and John was there, and he said, do you mind if we take one picture for promotional purposes? I said, yeah, I do. And he said, well, just the guy that supplied it from Oshawa or something like that. We took a picture. So Norm Betts, to the Toronto Sun photographer, just happens to be waiting at the door.
Yeah.
Comes in, takes some pictures. I get out of the hot tub, the phone rings. It's my father calling from Florida saying, did I just see my crazy son in a hot tub at Skydome? Yeah, Dad, it's too long a story to talk to you about right now.
Oh, that's amazing. I love
so
that.
the long and short of it is, the next morning I get up and going down to work. It was a Saturday morning. That was a Friday night. And my wife asked for a newspaper. So back in the days when you used to go to newspaper box, I go around the corner, and the Toronto Sun one looks kind of strange. It's a lot of green in it. And I'm going, wow, that's weird. I walk up and I go, oh my God.
So that made the cover?
Made the cover.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's iconic. Like, it is an iconic image. Who would expect to see a hot tub up
since
there?
then, everybody's got hot tubs in the arenas now.
Everyone's got hot tubs in the arenas.
I saw a picture of a guy sitting in a hot tub. I didn't know it was there. There was I don't know whether it was Photoshop, but it was right next to the glass. Where was that?
Oh, like in a hockey game?
In the hockey rink. hot tub next to the player's box. Maybe it was Photoshop.
What are you more proud of, Tom? Starting the trend of arranging restaurant deals with athletes, or the trend of hot tubs in arenas? Who knows? That's that. I love that story. And speaking of John McDermott, obviously, if the listener, if you're not familiar with John McDermott, he was an anthem singer for the Toronto Maple Leafs as well as the Boston Red Sox. A singer in and of his own right. We actually
we're going this
have
weekend.
A concert of his to go to.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll see you there.
Christmas concert.
He invited me a few years ago to this Christmas concert in the family, and we couldn't go because we always had things going. And finally, we found one of the dates one year that we went, and now it's part of our Christmas.
So special.
He is so good.
Yeah.
In a church with surrounding acts and or artists, phenomenal. If you get a chance, look it up. I don't know how to. I'm sure if you Google it, you can find a way.
John McDermott,
we're all going, and it's going to be great.
It's going to be great. That is this Saturday as of the release of this episode. So with John McDermott on the brain, I do have some rapid fire questions that he wanted me to ask you if we ever had you on the podcast. Some quick ones.
I may not answer all of
them.
You
may need to plead the fifth on one of them that I see in particular, but we've got one. What does a 9-wood mean to you?
Oh, jeez. I think John is the only person I know that has a 9-wood, and he can hit it 110 yards. He can hit it 190 yards out of the sand, out of the rough. I've never seen a guy use a 9-wood like that, but it's magic in his hands.
Okay, so he wanted me to ask that question so that you would compliment his golf skills with the 9-wood. I see that.
I won't compliment any of his other skills.
No.
They're non-existent.
Second question. Have you, can't believe we're asking this. Have you ever stabbed anyone with a fork?
No comment.
No comment. Okay. No comment on that one. We don't want any more people getting
all I'll say is my father promised never to have dinner with John and I after that.
Maybe off mic we'll get the in-depth story there. And the other one, this is to sort of cue us up and maybe to talk a little bit about your charitable pursuits as well. But can you speak a little bit about fundraisers for the Toronto Artillery Association that I think you would have done in tandem with John?
Well, what happened was a number of years ago, I was asked to be an honorary lieutenant colonel of the Canadian, the 7th Toronto Regiment, which is a division of the Canadian Artillery. And Royal Canadian Artillery, and it was just a fantastic thing because there's so many great people in the military that we never really meet. I mean, fortunately we don't have reason to meet them, but
right,
they're just great people to be around. They're highly intelligent people, and I kind of fell in love with the group and served in that role for almost 6 years. And one thing that they're not very good at, and another charity I'm involved in, Pro Action Cops and Kids, same thing. Police officers and military guys aren't really good at raising money.
Right.
They're really good at executing stuff, though.
Yeah,
and they're really good at finding common causes and executing those at a high level. So I did what I'm not bad at, raise some money for a couple causes, Canadian military, the Royal Canadian Army. And one of the highlights now is the John McDermott Christmas show. We actually do a Remembrance Day show with John, too, and a Christmas show. And we have a number of sponsors that cover the cost of it and make donations back to the Toronto Artillery Foundation. But it would not be what it is without John's commitment, because John makes it. I mean, as Brian was saying, what's special about John is he just doesn't sing. He tells you the story behind the song.
Yes.
And all of a sudden the song takes on an emotional meaning for you when you've heard the song a million times before and just thought it was a nice song.
Right. He's so good at that. Yeah. He tells at his concerts a story about the Charlie Brown Christmas Tree, which is my favorite Christmas movie. And every time he tells it, I tear up a little bit. I love that story. And I'm also fascinated. You mentioned Pro Action, a great premise for an organization to put police officers in touch with young kids for physical activity, the arts, that sort of thing. Was this an idea that you had come up with, or is this something that you had started in tandem with other groups?
Well, what happened about 30 years ago, my dad had lunch with then Chief William McCormick, and they were good friends for a number of years. And then one of the topics of discussion that came up was, what happened to the cop on the beat? He used to be in every neighborhood. He was the judge, he was the jury, he was the referee, he was the go-to guy for kids, he was the go-to guy for anybody. If you had an issue, you went and saw Constable Bob, and Bob would sort it out for you.
Cop on the beat, just to interrupt quickly in case you're not familiar with the lingo, is a cop on the street. A patrol person who is specific
now
to
you're
an
really
area.
you're dating us. Like when you have to explain that to people, I'm feeling really old.
I'm impressed Mike knew that.
Yeah. Jeez. Okay, sorry.
So with suburbanization of the city with people moving out to the suburbs, it became impossible to put cops on the street. They had to put them in cars, and once they put them in cars, they lost that personal contact. So my dad asked the chief if cops still became cops to make their communities better, and the chief said absolutely. 99.9% of them do that for that reason. They just want to make the community better. So my dad said, well, if I raise some money, will you let the cops know the money's there for them to run these programs? And so they said yes. And my dad got 9 corporate friends in with us. Each put up $100,000, so got $100,000 endowment. The idea back in those days was, and you can't relate to this, but your dad and I can. This was in the era of 15% interest rate. So the idea was that the endowment would raise 15%, $150,000 a year, and they put that into programs.
Oh.
Well, within 2 years, interest rates were down to 2 and 3%. So it became much more traditional fundraising. But I joined it 26 years ago. And the police officers are incredibly special, but the kids they work with in the community, I mean, you got to remember these kids are coming from countries a lot of times where the police officer is not your friend.
Right.
And we're trying to tell them that the police officer is your friend.
Right.
And it's culturally different for these kids to accept until they can actually spend some time with them. And
of course,
one of my favorite stories was the 2 cops told it at one of our golf tournaments, a fundraiser, but they ran a football program down in 51 Division down in Regent Park. And all these kids wanted to do was play football. So we stayed away from buying equipment, but this time we bought kids the entire football team, all their equipment. And they play exhibition games. And the kids fell in love with the cops fell in love with the kids, and it was just a great program. So one night, these 2 cops are in 51 Division, and they're on patrol, and they end up in a highly difficult situation, and it actually starts getting physical. And the one of the perpetrators is trying to take the gun out of the officer's holster, and they realize this is going to be life and death, and they kind of get control of the situation. They look up, and there's a number of people from these people, the 2 perpetrators' ethnic group, that are around them. And the cop said, I really thought my number was up. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a couple of kids come forward and say, hey, those are our coaches. And all of a sudden, all of the people from the community helped them.
Oh, wow.
Hold the people to get control of the situation. And it was one of those situations which you can't put a price tag on. You just say, thank God the programs were there and the cops had a chance to develop a relationship with the kids because it came through big time.
I actually have goosebumps hearing that story. I mean, it's something that never would have happened. As you mentioned, a lot of people coming in and assuming that cops are their enemies, but to put a police officer in touch with someone from the community and, just that handshake of common understanding of humanity, and then having it pay off in a situation like that, as you mentioned, is literally priceless, because who knows the way that could have gone. Yeah. You know what? We're running a little bit low on time. We haven't even touched on the Toronto Raptors and everything that your family did to bring them to Toronto. So maybe we save that for a potential.
You know what? If I'd love to get Tom back. There's so many more stories. We've talked about the restaurant a lot. We continue to touch on the Gretzky fantasy camp, which you're always a part of, and the Raptors, which was a big part of the success of Frameworth. One of our biggest jobs in the early days was with the Raptors when they first came to town for their first game. And with that, and the Blue Jays got us on our feet at the beginning. That were 2 of our biggest jobs. So
and it got you out of the bar business.
Yeah, and we opened Garduni's virtually the same time that you opened.
That's right.
And we didn't get into the history of the restaurant, because you had a restaurant that was a Meteor, right? Or was where that location was. It was then changed into Gretzky's or renovated.
Just quickly, so Wayne, when he was injured, it was November. It was Grey Cup weekend, and Wayne came up to spend the weekend in Toronto. So I had a bunch of site visits planned for him. So him, Mike, Walter, and I get in the car, and we start driving around downtown Toronto. We look at all these different sites, and I could just see none of them are really catching Wayne's eye. It's just not, they're not connecting. So we're driving down to Wellington before the condos were there, and you could actually see the restaurant from Wellington. And we're heading to the Skydome to have lunch at the Hard Rock Cafe. And as we go by the restaurant, Mike says to Wayne, "Oh, that's that's the family steakhouse."
Yeah.
And Mike goes, "Can we go see it? Because you did a good job on that." So I figured, fine. And so we pull up to the front of the building. It's like 11 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock in the morning, or 12 o'clock noon. And the staff's not even there yet because Saturday we don't open until 6. So I walk in, I turn on all the lights, and Wayne looks and goes, This is it.
Yeah. And what number of the street was it at the time?
It was 41 Peter Street back then.
41 Peter Street.
And a little bit of magic.
And somehow, with a little bit of pull, and when it became Blue Jay Way, and then, I don't know, this number 99 came up. I don't know how many numbers they had to skip to get it, but 99 Blue Jay Way, right?
And to Wayne's credit, that was met with a lot of resistance when that was proposed, and made the front page of the Globe and Mail, the national edition. And I felt so bad. I called Wayne up and I said, "Hey, Wayne, look, if it's all the same with you, I'll just pull it and we'll kill it and be done with it. I really apologize. I never thought it was going to be this big a hassle." Wayne's comment was, "Hey, we paid the price already, but just let it go, see what happens." About 2 months later, back when they used to televise city council meetings on TV on Rogers Channel 10, I'm in bed at night. It's got to be 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm flicking through the channels, and they say, "Now the matter of the renaming Peter Street, Blue Jays Way up to King Street, and adjusting the numbers on the street," or something like that. All in favor, and like 32 out of 33 councillors vote in favor of it. And I woke my wife up and I said, "Listen to this, because I may be dreaming." and Karen goes, no, that's what they're saying. They're changing the name of the street. So it made it through. And I give Wayne all the credit, because if it was up to me, I would have just killed it and ended the whole application process.
But it's
Wayne
part
said,
of the iconic.
but he said, we paid the price, so let it go.
Why wouldn't the city have done that for somebody that's done so much for Canada, but not just Edmonton and the cities he played, but for Toronto and Brantford? And
well, in fairness, Mayor Lassman was the one who initiated it, and he was the one who kept saying, "No, we're going to push this through. We're going to push this through." And he was getting resistance from the council. And I agree with you, Brian. Like, we have an iconic brand that wants to set up house in Toronto and be part of Toronto's future as we move forward.
Yeah.
And getting resistance to it.
Well, we've talked about the people that come here, not just to go. Some people just come to the restaurant during the summer. They want to see the restaurant, and they're coming from out of town. They're bringing dollars into the city. Why wouldn't you do that?
If we propose to a company like Amazon that they could come here and not pay taxes just because of the amount of influx of business that they'll bring, you'd think it would be easy enough to say something like, "We'll give you number 99 because it's paperwork and then it's iconic." But
it's also politics.
It's also politics. Speaking of iconic, I think this is quite the iconic interview. Tom, do you have anything that you're working on right now that you want to send people towards? Anything that you want to raise awareness about before we get going?
No.
There you go. We've already talked about all of it, but you'll continue obviously with your charitable pursuits there, and maybe we'll get you on again and talk a little bit about the Raptors, because that is a whole story that we didn't get into. You could fill a podcast on that. Yeah.
And Olympics
as well. So thanks once again for joining us, Tom. Absolute pleasure talking to you and reliving all these memories. For Tom Bitove, for Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth Sports Marketing, and myself, Mikey Aaronworth, this has been the Sign Off Podcast, and this is us signing off. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we made it to the end of yet another episode. Thanks again so much for joining us. You can find videos of all of our episodes on YouTube by searching the Sign Off Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at Frameworth Sport or Instagram at Frameworth Sports. And hey, if you're not sick of me yet, you can find me on Twitter over at Retrograde Mikey, or you can always find me embarrassing myself over on Instagram at Aaronworth. The Sign Off is a proud product of Fadoo Productions and Sad Styles Productions. Executive producers Mikey Aaronworth and Andrew Bascom. Until next week, this is Mikey Aaronworth, signing off.
Furnished by Sad Styles Productions.
Get into it.